Hello everyone, welcome. I hope you're all doing well. Thanks for joining us for another lesson in our ongoing French course. So in this lesson, we are going to look at the expression loin de, a preposition of location that is very important. You'll use it quite often in the spoken language, so it's really worth the time to make this part of your active vocabulary, and that's what we're going to do in this lesson. So what does loin de mean in French? It means far from. So we're working with these spatial relationships. Prepositions of location help us to do that. They help us to express the idea of where one thing is located in relation to another thing. So they're very useful. We use them all the time. So let's make this part of your active vocabulary with a lot of practice. So let's do something similar to what we did in our last lesson. Let's recycle that material so you'll find this a little bit easier to do. So remember, the easiest way to use loin de is to follow it with a noun to say far from something or someplace. So let's express these ideas in French. So how would you say far from the border? Remember, the border is la frontière. So put it together with loin de, and you have loin de la frontière. So you could say something like, well, we're far from the border. Nous sommes loin de la frontière. How about far from the station? And by station here, we mean like train station, which would be la gare. So far from the station, loin de la gare. Again, in a complete sentence, you might say something like, well, we are far from the station. Nous sommes loin de la gare. How about far from the bank? The bank, remember, is la banque. So we have loin de la banque. Loin de la banque. Far from the bank. So maybe if someone asks you, can you do me a favor? Are you close to the bank? You could say, oh, non. Je suis loin de la banque. I'm far from the bank. Loin de la banque. Far from the beach. Remember, the beach is la plage. La plage. So far from the beach would be loin de la plage. Loin de la plage. Far from the window. Window is la fenêtre. So put that together with loin de. Loin de la fenêtre. Loin de la fenêtre. Far from the window. Notice that all of these words are grammatically feminine. They all take the la. Now let's take a look at some nouns that take the L apostrophe. Remember, the L apostrophe can be for nouns that are grammatically masculine or grammatically feminine. So far from the island, loin de l'île. Loin de l'île. Far from the airport. Remember, airport is l'aéroport. So put that together with loin de, and you have loin de l'aéroport. Again, remember the word aéroport has 4 syllables. A, E, ro, port. Aéroport. So far from the airport, loin de l'aéroport. Far from the hotel. The word for hotel is l'hôtel, remember, with the L apostrophe. So put it together with loin de, and you have loin de l'hôtel. Loin de l'hôtel. Far from the hotel. Loin de l'hôtel. Far from the university. University, l'université. Put it together with loin de, and you have loin de l'université. Loin de l'université. Far from the university. And finally, the last word here is the school, l'école. So far from, loin de, put it together with l'école, and you have loin de l'école, loin de l'école, far from the school. Now let's take a look at some nouns that are grammatically masculine, which means they take the le as the definite article. And remember that de and le contract to the word du. So if I want to say far from downtown or the city center, downtown, the city center is le centre-ville. So loin de, remember de and le become du, so we have loin du centre-ville, loin du centre-ville. Far from the wall, the word for wall is le mur, so we have loin du mur, loin du mur, far from the wall. The train is le train, so far from the train would be loin du train, loin du train. Far from the lake would be le lac, so far from the lake, loin du lac. Far from the building is le bâtiment, so far from the building, loin du bâtiment, loin du bâtiment. Okay, so now in a complete sentence, we would have more than just the loin de in the noun. Before that, we would have a noun and another verb. So let's take a look at some examples with complete sentences. If I wanted to say, for example, the bank is far from the post office, let's go ahead and start off with loin de, the bank, la banque, and we need our verb. So the bank is, la banque est loin de, and all we need is the word for post office, which is la poste, la poste. La banque est loin de la poste. The bank is far from the post office. So there you have a very nice, very beautiful, very complete sentence in French. How about the school is far from the city center, or it's far from downtown? Let's start off with the school, l'école. The school is, l'école est. The school is far from, l'école est loin de. The city center. The school is far from the city center. L'école est loin du centre-ville. Remember, de and le combined to du. The bus stop is far from the school. L'arrêt de bus. The bus stop is, l'arrêt de bus est. The bus stop is far from, l'arrêt de bus est loin de, and the bus stop is far from the school. L'arrêt de bus est loin de l'école. And again, there you have a very nice, very beautiful, very complete sentence in French. And your French is getting more sophisticated as we go from lesson to lesson. Okay, so that's it for this lesson. Thanks so much for watching. If you found it helpful, I would appreciate it very much if you give it a like. Subscribers, thank you so much for your support. To go on to another lesson, click on the video that appears here on your screen. See you soon. À bientôt.